So, welcome to my very messy car. It's Thursday on the Pagan Perspective, and I'm Yaka. So before starting, I do have to apologize. I don't have the question written out, so I'm working from memory, but I will post it below for all of you. So this week we've been talking about male witches, the origin of the word, and how it's reflected and used in the media in terms of relating to males. So the viewer asks us or points out that they have usually seen males in the media referred to as warlocks or wizards or druids or something other than witches. And witches usually refers to a female. One of the aspects of the question was, where do we think that comes from? So I went ahead and did a little bit of research on that, and what I found was that there really wasn't consensus. There was a lot of different possible origins from it. So I will leave that aspect to you to go ahead and look up. I'm guessing you'll probably be just as confused as I was in terms of what it really comes from, which is actually a very difficult thing to do, to determine the actual origins of word. And I know that there are linguists who spend their whole lives on it, but it's still tricky, you know. My initial sense was that the word probably comes, however it got into our language, from a time before English was really English, when it was Old English, and we still used gender nouns. Just like in Spanish, some things are male and some things are female, usually having the O or the A ending. And words and things are thought about a little bit differently. Our language now, we use a neutral language. We don't think of the table as being something feminine or something masculine. But in many languages, that's part of the language, and the way people think about it is reflected in the language, or the language causes or people to think about it that way, a framework. So I'm guessing that there probably had a lot of that to do with it, and also the typical gender roles that were played, especially up until very recently, and unfortunately, in my opinion, still recently, what a woman is viewed or is viewed as being capable of. And so what a witch was and what a wizard was may have been very different. Now, when I hear the term, they aren't really the same thing to me. And yes, they do have very strong media or visual connotations with it. I hear wizard, and I think of Gandalf, like that image. That's what I hear in my head. Or other things that come to mind, Harry Potter. Interestingly, books chose to distinguish between witch and wizard, or rather to say that they were the same, but one was a title for a female and one was a title for a male. I don't really think that they actually are the same thing because of the connotations today that come with them. Same thing, warlock usually is considered is basically the same as a wizard in the way that I have heard it used, whether that's its actual original meaning, I don't know. But that it's a bad thing, an evil thing, whereas a wizard can be benign or beneficial, like Gandalf or Merlin or something like that, whereas a witch tends to have a very negative connotation. I think that probably comes from our past, particularly European relationship towards women. And that's a pretty long discussion. I don't have a lot of the actual resources, that the sources to talk about that, so I'm cautious to go too into depth about it, because I'd be speaking purely from opinion. And though this is the pagan perspectives, and we do talk and we talk quite a bit about opinions, I think when we are expressing them and on such a public forum such as YouTube, it's important to be able to back that up, back up what you're saying. So anyways, in today's world, I think that what I've been exposed to, the meaning of the word, the idea of a witch is usually a evil woman who practices magic. Interestingly, I have the same connotation about a sorceress, but a sorceress is usually, these are the images that come to mind you, not what I actually think about Wiccans and other neo-pagans and whatnot. But a sorceress usually is sexy, whereas a witch is usually not. And but they're both evil in the perception, which I don't like, because that's saying that if a woman has power, she's somehow evil. Whereas a wizard isn't necessarily evil, and he can have power, but not be evil. As soon as he's evil, he's actually a warlock. Again, I know that these are not necessarily the actual meaning of the words, but these are the meanings that what I grew up seeing on the media, and what words come to mind. So part of the question was, what part can we play to change some of these connotations? First, I think that there's been huge progress over the last few decades, over the last few centuries actually, a century and a half really, on dealing with that. I think that it's a little bit deeper of an issue than just religious tolerance, in terms of recognizing that many neo-pagans identify as being witches, but that it really comes down to our relationship towards women and men. So I think it really is an issue of feminism, in terms of treating both of the sexes and everywhere in between equally and respectfully. And by being mindful of that, by pointing out those tiny things that we do in life that reinforces those stereotypes, those attitudes, such as pointing out mankind, one that really bugs me, especially being that females are the slight, ever so slight, but the majority of our species. We refer to our species as mankind. Little things like that, just chipping away at it, and bigger things, taking part in some of the mass actions, like the largest in human history, 1 Billion Rising, or supporting legislation that makes that kind of behavior more difficult. And I really do think that the idea of a witch or a sorceress being evil will be chipped away in that process of chipping away the negative feelings and beliefs that we have about women.